Hi folks, in this video I'm going to show you how to start playing with React with minimal setup. Now, a lot of people are intimidated by React because it requires you to set up Babel and Webpack and all these other dependencies. It can be a little confusing. You can play with React in your browser using just a few libraries. You're very limited in what you can do, but it's a good way to start playing with React and learning the basics. So as you can see here, I've got an HTML file with 3 libraries being imported. We have our React library for creating views. We have React DOM for rendering those views into the browser. We have browser.js from the Babel core, which is a deprecated library, but it nevertheless allows us to import a JavaScript file with type text/Babel, and we can write JSX syntax in that JavaScript file, and Babel will transpile that to native JavaScript for us. In order for this to work, we also need to serve our application from a web server. So we can do that just by using the simple HTTP server, which is a great little Python library. Super easy. So now we're serving this HTML from a web server. We can import this JavaScript file. So you can see we have an element here for our React application to hook into. So let's start making some React views. First, let's make the controller of our application. Let's make a new class called app, and it extends the component class in the React library. We'll just give it a render function that returns some JSX. Now JSX is going to be transpiled into basically function calls. So you have to remember that you can't do something like this because you're essentially trying to return some function and some other function. And that doesn't make any sense. You can't have 2 return values. So each return value has to just have one root node. So here's our render function. We have one root node, which is a div. We can add an h1 to that and do our classic hello world, and nothing happens. Why is that? Well, we've created our class, but we're not rendering it into the browser. This is where React DOM comes in. So React DOM has a method called render, and it takes a React component and a DOM element in the browser. So we're going to get our app element here, and now this will render the app component into the app element in the browser. Now this is cool, but we're not really taking advantage of any of the flexibility of React or JSX. One thing that's really cool is that we can interpolate JavaScript into here. We can add these curly braces and then do some string interpolation inside of a p tag. Name is name. So now you can see we've just got some JavaScript here that's interpolated into our template. Oops. The name is John. Cool. Now this is interesting, but it's not quite as cool as we can really get. Let's make a stateless component. Now as you can see, this app class, it is a class, so it can be given state. But for the majority of our components, we want them to be stateless because those are much more easy to reason about than stateful components. So let's just do a const name tag equals, this is going to be a fat arrow function, gets props, and it's just a simple function. We're going to return some JSX. And remember to wrap that in a root element so that we only have one return value. Let's give it the name, props.name, and props.description. Sure, we can do really anything here. Okay, so now we've got another component. This time it's a stateless component. It's just a function. And it takes props, which are essentially the arguments to this function. They look like attributes in a JSX element. You'll see that in just a second. And it takes a prop of name and a prop of description. So let's create a little bit of a data set here. Const data equals. Alright. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass this into our app when we render it into the browser. So this is going down into our application from the top level component. So we can say data equals data. And now app is getting the prop of data. And then we can, right here, let's create a method. We don't want to pollute our template here with too much JavaScript, so we hide it inside of methods. Say this dot render data. Render data. It's kind of a crappy name, but whatever. This is just a simple example. And now we're going to do something really cool, which is we're going to map over our data. So let's do this dot props dot data dot map. We want to return this. That works. And here what we're doing is we're going to be returning an array of React views. So inside this JavaScript block, you can put an array of React views, and that will be handled by the React engine just fine. So we're going to return a name tag for each person, where the name is equal to person.name, and the description is equal to person.description. Okay. And we'll see that pop up in our browser. Okay, now that we know some of the basics of how to render a React application using JSX and JavaScript, we can start thinking about how to manage state. Now here I have a really simple app component that I'm rendering into the browser. And I have a data array of some to-dos, and I have a function here that just simulates a AJAX request by returning a resolved promise. So how do we want to manage state in our application? First of all, any component that is a class that extends React component can have state. We add state by creating the state object in the constructor with whatever properties we want. Great, if we're making a simple to-do app, we have our data, which is a list of to-dos. We can call that to-dos if we want. We have a new to-do, which is the to-do that we're going to add. And for AJAX requests, we typically want to do those in component did mount, because we don't want to start updating the application and re-rendering it until we're sure it's mounted in the browser. So in component did mount, we call our fetch data function, which returns a promise with our data in it. And then we use a special function given to us by React.component called setState. And setState takes an object as an argument, and it will merge the contents of this argument in with your state, and then it will re-render your application starting with this component and going down through the children. So in setState, we're going to just set to-dos equal to our data, and then it will re-render on its own. And of course, we want to be able to see those to-dos. So as we learned last time, we can just do this.state.todos.map. And this will return an array of React components. Let's just do a p with todo.text. So we're rendering using this JavaScript curly braces to render an array of React components. So this is a basic setup for adding state to a component, fetching data from the server, and then rendering that data by mapping over it and creating an array of React components. And there are to-dos.